Good morning and good afternoon, colleagues. A very warm welcome to Aga Khan Foundation's conference on girls' education in fragile contexts, how to deliver a program where the risks are high, an incredibly pertinent topic given the state of the world today. My name is Dr. Akila Dathu, and I am thrilled to be your MC for the day. Globally, much has been achieved with regards to girls' education, particularly in fragile contexts. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has threatened to undo some of those successes and set us back a couple of steps. As a global community committed to ensuring all girls have access to education, including the most vulnerable and marginalized, it's worthwhile reflecting on what has worked, what has not, and what we want to focus on in the future to ensure we build back better. During our conference, you will hear from the Afghanistan's Ministry of Education, donors, and implementers who will reflect on the past 8 years of partnership and look forward to what is next for girls' education in Afghanistan and other fragile contexts. Just some quick housekeeping rules. We're all joining from our own homes and workspaces, but just for nostalgia's sake, if a fire alarm goes off on your end, this is not an AKF drill, and we strongly recommend you go to your nearest exit. There will be 3 points during the conference where we will solicit questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen to insert your questions there. As we have limited time, we will hand select a few for the speakers to answer at key moments during the conference. When posting questions, please do feel free to add your name and organization or enter the question anonymously. The choice is entirely yours. Without further ado, it gives me immense pleasure introducing you to our first speaker, Dr. Matt Reed. I met Matt first in India when he hired me to be a part of the AKF team in his role as CEO. At the time, he had already been with AKF for close to 5 years. 7 years later, Matt is now CEO of AKF UK and recently took on an additional role as Global Director for Institutional Partnerships. Matt has significant experience in strategic planning, operations and management, and nonprofit governance. Matt, over to you.
Thanks so much, Akila, and thank you for walking me a little bit down memory lane. It's been great to work with you. And in fact, Akila and I have been working on issues about girls' education since that time. And so it's a real special privilege for me to welcome all of you today. And it's a special privilege because this is a subject that matters greatly to the Aga Khan Development Network that Akila and I both work with. In fact, it's one of the issues I would say that we feel most strongly about. Our very first institutions were schools, and they were schools founded in Kutch, in Gujarat, and in Zanzibar, founded precisely with the goal of educating girls a century ago. And so that gives you a sense of how important girls' education and women's empowerment have been to our network over time, and how fundamental really it has been and remains to our work. In the last 3 decades, we've helped 10 million girls get in school, stay in school, and learn in school, and we continue that work today. We're doing that work today in 15 countries, focused on marginalized children and youth, but especially girls, how to get them in school and help them thrive there. And so to work, I think if you think about our global education strategy and what we're trying to do is we think about not only girls' education, but also helping marginalized children learn, we focus on a few core areas. So the first is improving access and quality. We think it's vitally important to focus on quality because parents must have confidence that their children are actually learning when they go to school. And so we do that by looking at the classroom level, at the school level, and at the systems level of education systems in the countries where we're present. We also feel very strongly that this work has to be locally rooted and relevant. So we take a whole community approach. Girls and marginalized children need many, many points of support in communities to ensure that they can get and stay in school. Another thing that's critical to our approach is promoting pluralism by ensuring that classrooms are inclusive that they're welcoming for every child, and especially girls. And then lastly, if we want to make a lasting difference and we want to really improve the quality of education, we have to focus on teachers, because teachers need our respect, they need our support, and they need to be valued. A recent example of this approach in action is something called Schools 2030. This is a coalition of 10 foundations that will be working over 10 years in 10 countries in 1,000 schools, finding locally led solutions to improve learning outcomes. And it's really based on lessons that we've learned in the Stages project, where what we're trying to do is root global resources in local realities about what works to help girls and boys learn against the odds. And I think that phrase really encapsulates what we're trying to do and what this conference is about today: how to help girls learn against the odds. And so today, as we talk about and we think about Stages, which for AKF is a real flagship program of ours in Afghanistan, we think it's worth pointing out that it builds on work that we've done in neighboring areas in Pakistan and India since the 1980s. In Afghanistan, we had been present in the mid-90s, starting with humanitarian assistance and girls' education home to home, but really ramping that up in 2002 with the fall of the Taliban, supported by many generous partners, including the Government of Canada, Switzerland, our own resources, and others. Stages, however, started in 2013. And I think we need to acknowledge here at the very beginning of my remarks today and of this conference today, first by noting the involvement of the Afghan Ministry of Education from the very beginning, which itself has been committed to this issue and has been a key partner of ours in making this change possible. The other, of course, is to thank and recognize the UK government and its global leadership on girls' education. I think all of us recognize the way that the UK government has helped galvanize international opinion and the international community around this issue, and all of us who care about it, I think, owe them great thanks. The program is also supported by USAID, looking at that crucial transition between primary to secondary school and, of course, into graduation. And then we've had great technical support from the fund manager of the Girls Education Challenge, PricewaterhouseCoopers. But the ones I want to focus on right now are the group of the extraordinary consortium that AKF has been leading, but really has been learning from throughout this process for the last 8 years. And so if I could just take a moment here to name and recognize them, and I think if we were all together, I would ask you to join me in a round of applause. I'm not going to ask you to turn on your microphones to do that, but please at least mentally applaud at your homes, because it really is an extraordinary group. And they include CARE, Catholic Relief Services, Save the Children, the Afghan Education Production Organization, the Aga Khan Education Services, Roshan Telecommunications, and last but not least, my colleagues at the Aga Khan Foundation in Afghanistan. The results have been truly impressive. 210,000 girls have been directly assisted by this program in 14 provinces. That's 3/4 of the country, truly demonstrating that change can happen even in some of the most conservative areas. And so I just want to put that a bit into perspective. So what that means is that a girl who started this program in 2013 is now on the cusp of graduating or has graduated. That's an entire generation of girls that this program has worked with to help a generation of girls really that's grown up with us, if you will, and whose horizons have been expanded as a result of this program. And I think it's very important to think about them and the difference that this has made in their lives, even as we think about the lessons that we think this program might have for other parts of Afghanistan and other parts of the world. Now, I think other people are going to talk about the many accomplishments of the program beyond just the outreach. And so I don't want to focus on all of those, but I do want to focus on just two. because I think they're important as we think about the future of girls' education in Afghanistan and elsewhere. The program trained 7,600 teachers, but what's more important, at least for me anyway today, is that it also helped 2,000 older girls become teachers, and in the process helped them become role models that are much needed for other girls in Afghanistan and also for their communities, so that people see that there is a pathway for them. It also engaged with 7,000 mullahs or shura members in local communities to ensure that the communities that these girls were living in were supportive of this approach. And I think all of us intuitively can understand that the success of this program would not have been possible if it hadn't been for that kind of community outreach. And I think that, for me anyway, is one of the vital lessons, and I know it's something that colleagues will talk about later today. I think there are a couple of really telling statistics, things that we've learned in the past year during this lockdown, during the educational disruption that's taken place all over the world, but especially in Afghanistan. We did a rapid assessment in Afghanistan, our partners along with us, and learned two, I think, very important things. The first was that 99% of the girls in this program reported that they continued learning, despite the disruption, despite increased family responsibilities, despite sick relatives, they were still able to continue doing some part of their studies at home. And the second was that 70% of them said that they had been contacted and supported by their local shura members. So that gives you a sense of the way that families and communities have embraced girls' education in these places and have helped them during this extraordinary period of disruption. And I think what's remarkable about that is it gives us a sense of social change. And it shows us that at some level, social norms have started to shift, at least in these places. And I think that what that tells us is that we have the ingredients there for a new era of new expectations and new aspirations. And I think that evidence is crucial because it really touches on two key questions for the future of girls' education in Afghanistan. The first is around post-pandemic. What is going to happen after this pandemic? Because we know that there are about 2 million girls who have not benefited from this program, who have not had necessarily that kind of community support during the pandemic. And we know that we will need an urgent emergency action to help get those girls back in school. And that's as true in Afghanistan, that's as true, I guess, in the rest of the world as it is in Afghanistan. Because we all know that too many girls have been sent home, they've not been supported in learning, and of course, we fear that many of them will not go back to school. And so I think that's probably one of the first lessons that I take out of it. The second, I think, gets to the heart of the very issue of Afghanistan's future. We all wonder what is going to happen during this peace process, which we all pray will be successful. But if there is a successful peace process and the Taliban re-enters government, what happens to girls' education? What is the future? And I think that what our program has demonstrated is that change, and in fact, progress, is still possible even in some of the most conservative parts of the country, even in parts of the country that are Taliban held. And I think there are really important lessons there as we think not only about girls' education in Afghanistan, but about how the international community itself should remain engaged in the country. There was a really good report by the Overseas Development Institute recently looking at the issue of education and the Taliban. And one of the things that it showed is, first of all, there's not one Taliban, there are many Talibans, and that they are all in negotiation, in a complex set of negotiations with local people, and that local needs can influence the way that they think about education in certain places. And so we see that in many places, actually, as we've learned in our program, the Taliban is actually accommodating the desires of communities to get girls in school and help them learn. And so I think that surely the work of Stages helps underscore the value of staying engaged and staying invested. The other really important thing about the ODI report, and one of the things it underscored, is that because Afghanistan's education budget is so heavily supported by the international community, it gives us an important point of leverage and an entry point for dialogue in the future. And I think it really argues strongly for staying engaged, because we know that there's much left to do. I mean, I talked already about 2 million girls in Afghanistan who have not benefited from this kind of program. And of course, we know even from our own work that there's much work that's left to be done on helping girls who are in primary school stay into secondary school and then graduate and have other kinds of transitions. I mean, I think it's very clear that we owe it to this generation of girls that we've been working with, but also to a generation of girls who haven't yet been able to be touched by this program. Now, as we turn to the rest of the day and the rest of our program, we're going to be thinking about lessons for the future of the program, not only for Afghanistan, but for other parts of the world, other fragile contexts, other places where it's really difficult to work. What questions still need to be answered and what questions still require our action. Now, yesterday there were about 120 people, many of you, I presume, from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from North America, who gathered together representing governments, international organizations, NGOs, foundations, academics, and I think most importantly, local organizations and the people who we're working with, not only in Afghanistan, but elsewhere. And those are voices that often aren't represented in meetings like this, but they were yesterday. And coming out was, what my colleagues tell me, was a very rich set of discussions and conclusions. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that came out of the discussion yesterday, and that we will probably pick up on over the course of the day. So there were 6 concurrent workshops. They were focused on gender transformation, cultural norms, sustainability, innovation, engaging men and boys, and safeguarding. And some of the headlines that came out of the group, some of the conclusions that they wanted represented in the discussion today included. The first is that long-lasting change goes beyond the classroom. It really does require a community and a family approach. That we have to also think about extracurricular activities, so things that can help build girls' self-confidence, their self-respect, but also help them bond as a peer group so that they can support one another. That pathways to work, including teaching, are really very important for these girls so that it can help increase their own credibility and standing inside their families and communities, demonstrating that there's a value to education for them and their families. One of the other conclusions was that we need to think very strongly about the enabling environment. So that family environment, obviously the communities and families that are supportive, but very practically about certain barriers, things that are literally stopping girls from getting to school, whether that's transportation, whether that's lack of money for fees, and so thinking about scholarship programs, whether it's lack of access to toilets, those sorts of things are vitally important. It's also important that girls understand their rights, that they understand that they have a right to go to school and to be educated, but also that they understand what kinds of interactions with them are appropriate and not appropriate, and that they feel empowered to report things that are inappropriate when they happen. The group emphasized that we need to think about the sustainability of these programs from the design phase, and so have a very long-term horizon, but also realize that in fragile environments, you must remain flexible. And we think that one of the hallmarks of this program has been its flexibility. And so we're, of course, grateful to FCDO and USAID for allowing us to design the program that way. Lastly, for generational change, you have to have a long-term approach and investment. And again, that local context is critical. Now, I've barely scratched the surface, but I know that I'm coming up on time. And so I want to give others an opportunity to talk about this. As you can hear, I'm so passionate about this work. As I said, Akila and I were working on it together in India 7 years ago. Our organization has been working on it for a very, very, very long time. And so again, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you, but also to thank you for the work that you've done in this program in Afghanistan, but more generally, what all of you are trying to do to help girls have better futures. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that welcome, Matt, and for capturing so well and succinctly all the work AKF has been doing in girls' education for many, many decades, and for capturing the very rich discussions we had yesterday. That was definitely not an easy feat we gave you. We will now move on to our first keynote speaker, the Director for Education and Gender Equality, as well as Special Envoy on Gender Equality at FCDO, Alicia Herbert, OBE. Post the keynote, we will take just a couple of questions from the audience, so please do add any questions you may have to the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. In the world of education development, Alicia requires no introduction. She has more than 20 years experience in international development. She has worked with a range of organizations, including multilaterals, academia, and since 1999, the Department for International Development, which we now say called the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, FCDO. She has extensive experience in the field, as well as Asia, including in fragile countries. It gives me great privilege to welcome Alicia to our conference. Alicia, over to you.
Huge thanks for that, Akila. And, Matt, thank you very much for that very passionate introduction and taking us through the kind of key contours of the program and the future of it. That was hugely inspiring. I'm delighted to be here today, and huge thanks to all who have worked to bring this event together on what is the 8th anniversary of the Stages program, a program that has demonstrated, as Matt outlined for us, the gains in access as well as learning, girls' leadership and the empowerment in an incredibly difficult context and environment. Those are significant achievements. I'd also like to thank our colleagues in the US government for their financial and other support to this important and innovative girls' education program in Afghanistan. And we look forward to future discussions on how we can build on this collaboration. The UK support to Stages through the Girls' Education Challenge sits in a wider context of our championing the right of every girl to 12 years of quality education. We champion girls' education because we know that it is the best investment that any nation can make. The case for the investment in girls' education is clear and compelling. I'll just touch on 3 of those issues. Educating girls creates healthier societies and saves lives. We know that a child whose mother can read is 50% more likely to live beyond the age of 5 and twice as likely to attend school themselves, and 50% more likely to be immunized. If every girl went to secondary school, infant mortality could be cut in half, saving 3 million lives every year. Educating girls makes economic sense, helps level up societies, and it stops poverty in its tracks. It boosts income, and just 1 additional school year, a woman's earnings can increase by 1/5. It develops economies. $28 trillion could be added to the global GDP if women had the same role in the labor market as men. And we know that educating girls helps to reduce violence in societies. Greater gender equality decreases the likelihood of conflict by more than 1/3. And we know that when women meaningfully participate in peace talks, the resulting agreement is 64% less likely to fail and 35% more likely to last at least 15 years. But we also know that the challenges to realizing these benefits in countries affected by conflict and crisis is particularly acute. In fragile contexts, girls face a triple crisis of learning, gender inequality, and insecurity or displacement. And that makes it more difficult for them to access and stay in school. Just to put it in perspective, 67 million girls, about half of the girls who are out of school globally, live in conflict and crisis affected countries. And so realizing the benefits of girls' education in conflict in these crisis settings is more challenging for a number of reasons. One, because conflict amplifies existing structural inequalities, which often means that women and girls who are already disadvantaged with respect to schooling or access to other services fall further behind. Two, extreme weather events such as drought and flooding and cyclones are becoming more frequent and severe because of climate change and the climate crisis. Girls' lives are disrupted, and so too is their education. Those who are already marginalized, for example, through poverty, displacement, or disability, are likely to be worst impacted. In Afghanistan, this means that the mild winters and the drought as seen this year may become increasingly common, putting girls at risk of food insecurity and displacement. And third, disease outbreaks are also a major source of displacement from education. These events are becoming even more frequent as the climate change accelerates. And we know, for example, the impact of COVID. UNESCO estimates that 290 million children are currently out of school due to COVID-19, and that girls are likely to be hardest hit. And they estimate that up to 20 million girls may not return to school, may not return to any form of education after the pandemic subsides. And so last week, the celebration in Afghanistan of the return to school of all students is quite a milestone. Now the challenge begins to ensure that we don't lose the gains made by girls and indeed all children over recent years. And this is why education in emergencies and protracted crises is a priority for the UK government. Without action to address these threats to girls' education, there is a real risk that global progress towards SDG 4, the SDG around education and access to education, could be significantly reversed. And so the UK is championing progress and change to address this. What are we doing? We have set out ambitious global targets of getting 40 million more girls globally into school by 2025, and a third more girls reading by the age of 10 in low and middle income countries, also by 2025. We are rallying others to back, promote, and achieve these goals, and to stand up for every girl's right to 12 years of quality education. We are pushing for coordinated effort to support girls displaced from education due to emergencies and protracted crises. We are putting girls' education at the heart of our G7 presidency, allowing its transformative power to get the profile it deserves, as well as the much needed focus on financial and political commitments. We also have a focus on funding, and the UK this year, with Kenya and the Global Partnership for Education, will host in London in July the GPE replenishment, looking to raise about $5 billion over the course of the next 5 years to give 175 million children the opportunity to learn. And a strong collective pledge from the G7 countries would go a long way to achieving this. And will continue to be the largest donor to Education Cannot Wait, the global fund for education in emergencies. But this is not about what the UK is doing. I'm not here just to talk about what the UK is doing, because the scale and the depth of the challenge that we've got before us defies any one nation. What's required, we think, is coordinated and concerted global action, and global effort is what is needed. We think that we need predictable funding, which enables long-term planning and action to ensure girls in conflict and crisis receive quality education. We think that better coordination of donor support is needed, making use of existing and proven mechanisms such as the ECW or GPE, or indeed any other kind of coming together of foundations, for example, that Matt spoke about earlier on, to ensure a joint approach that makes the most effective use of resources. And we believe that high quality, sustainable interventions are also what are needed. This means ensuring a comprehensive package of support that moves away from simply distributing textbooks. We need to be setting up spaces to focus on learning, protection, well-being of children and school staff, to bring that wider community into the fore as well. And indeed, an approach which is inclusive and one, for example, that recognises the importance of bringing into the fold children living with disabilities so that they're not left behind. And the Girls' Education Challenge has pioneered the use of the Washington Group questions to collect disaggregated data on disability, including in conflict-affected contexts. And we also think that building and disseminating evidence on what works is hugely important. To use our resources well, we need to understand the approaches which are likely to be most effective in every context. And high-quality evidence and data are central to that effort. The Girls' Education Challenge, and indeed the Stages programme specifically, have an important role to play in all of this. We as the UK, we are proud of the Girls' Education Challenge. It's one of our flagship education programmes. And Stages is one of dozens of GET projects across 17 countries that has helped to support Afghani girls since 2013. This includes not only supporting girls in Afghanistan with the opportunities and skills needed to learn, but also help to create and empower the next generation of female teachers and role models. And Matt spoke about some of these results. And we know it has not been an easy task, because Afghanistan is recognized as one of the most difficult operating environments in the world. And many of these challenges compounded over the course of the past year by COVID-19. So thanks again to the Aga Khan Foundation, and indeed to all of the Stages partners for their hard work and commitment over the course of the past 8 years, which has been so essential to the success of the programme. And again, of course, thank you to USAID for partnership on this journey. There are many lessons, and Matt started talking about some of these, there are many lessons that we can extract from the Stages successes, and I'll just highlight a few. We are learning more about educational challenges faced by girls. For example, recent analysis has shown that during the school closures, a majority of girls didn't have access to technology to help them to learn remotely. And they also face increased risk of anxiety, gender-based violence, financial stress, early marriage, and dropout. It is important to understand and address these challenges to help us to find better ways to support girls back into school. We also know that where girls have support from their peers and parents and teachers and community leaders during school closures, this has helped to protect them, their well-being, to support their learning, and to encourage them to return to school when that became possible. And more broadly, Stages has so much to share on how to engage boys and men as allies and agents of change to address some of the issues that may prevent girls from achieving their potential. In closing, I want to come back to the human element of all of this, to all of those Afghani girls at the heart of the Stages programme, and to girls like Miriam, an 11-year-old who I met in northern Nigeria many, many years ago when I was posted there. Miriam, who, despite what appeared to have been insurmountable barriers in and outside of the home, was determined to get an education. And events like these this morning, events like this conference, give us an opportunity to reflect, to draw the lessons, and to document what works. They steel us to meet the challenges of educating girls in some of these very challenging contexts and environments around the world. And it helps to ensure that we leave no girl behind. Thank you, Akila, and thank you, Matt, and wish you all a fantastic conference today. Thank you.
Alicia, thank you for those very critical insights. It has and it continues to be clear the immense importance the FCDO places on girls' education and the leadership it has taken on to achieve this. We've actually crossed our time, but I want to take one question at least from the audience, and I hope that's fine with you, Alicia. And the one question is the big question that I think we're all sort of thinking. COVID-19 came and all these successes and achievements that we had made on girls' education were undone. Could you reflect on what is your view on the fact that these things were undone, like these achievements were undone? What is critical now for us to do to ensure this is never undone in the future?
Thank you very much for that question, Akila. I think that so look, the pandemic hit us all by surprise, didn't it? It was about a year ago today that, for example, I started working from home, and I thought I'll probably work from home for a few weeks, and then I'll, be back in the office with some level of restriction, but not very much. I think nothing prepared us for what has been described, I think quite rightly, to be this biggest disruption to education that the world has ever known. Every child, from Afghanistan to parts of the UK or Europe or Sub-Saharan Africa, has actually been impacted by this. And we knew, we're fearing, and we're beginning to get the data now about how it has disproportionately impacted different groups of children, including girls. And we know that there have been learning losses. They're usually learning losses when children are off school, just over the school holidays. So being off school for months on end, actually, we know that they're learning losses. I think there are a number of things for us moving forward. One is that we really need, when it's safe to do so, the children are back into school, but not starting where they left off on the curriculum, a year ago. We've got to start from where they are, right? So that's whole business about teaching at that level as to where children are, starting at that particular point, I think, which is really crucial. So all of those methods, and so that we've known all along, we really have to bring them into play right now, when kids return to school. So it's that whole business of trying to regain those learning losses, for children to catch up to at least where they were a year ago. And then I think there are major lessons for us to think about in terms of how resilient are our education systems. If we are to be hit by another shock in whatever form in the future, how prepared are we? And therefore, what do we need to put in place right now to ensure that we're able to bounce back more quickly? We're able to continue to support the education of children and young people across the world with as minimal disruption as possible. So I think it's getting them back, starting and catching up, but also thinking longer term as well about how we get more resilient systems in place. And systems, let's not pretend that the systems before were necessarily equitable. We did have challenges. We had a learning crisis even before the pandemic hit. So let's ensure that those systems are not only more resilient, but indeed more equitable, and in fact that they produce learning as well. So those are the sorts of things that I would say. I hope I've answered the question.
Yes, thank you, Alicia. That was amazing. I would love to take more questions, but we're running out of time. So I'll just conclude this section by saying that I believe I speak for many of the attendees today when I say it's incredibly comforting to hear that girls' education continues to be such a high priority for the FCDO, particularly given all the prior investments and amazing successes we've seen through the Girls' Education Challenge. So thank you, Alicia. Now it's time to hear from our, thank you. Now it's time to hear from our partners implementing girls' education in Afghanistan. AKF and its partners first began implementing stages or steps towards Afghan girls' education success in 2013. It ran for 5 years with support from the UK government's Girls' Education Challenge Fund. The project delivered a comprehensive package of interventions to ensure a sustainable ladder of learning opportunities for girls from pre-primary, primary, and secondary levels through to teacher training and adult literacy across 16 of Afghanistan's 34 provinces. Now, the initial program closed in 2017, but its successes led to a second round of funding from FCDO and USAID for stages 2, another 3.5-year program, and the Leave No Girl Behind Plus project, which is due to end next year. Despite spending a couple of years managing this program, nothing I say will quite summarize stages well enough, the magnitude of this program and the emotions that are driving it. So I welcome you to watch our video and allow Leila, a young Afghan girl, to tell you herself. Sanan? Thank you, Sanan. I always find that video incredibly moving and emotional. I will now hand you over to Dr. Sharon Tao, Education Director of the Girls Education Challenge, to facilitate a panel discussion with our Stages Consortium partners. Once again, we will take some Q&A from the audience at the end of the session, so feel free to add in your questions into the Q&A box. Dr. Sharon Tao is a senior education and gender advisor with extensive experience in implementing large-scale education programs in sub-Saharan Africa, India, and the Eastern Caribbean. She also has prior experience teaching classes of 100+ students in government schools across Tanzania and Rwanda. So for all the teachers on this conference, we recognize that's quite a feat. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you, Akila. Thanks very much. And thank you for that video. And thank you as well, Alicia and Matt, for your very thoughtful and inspirational reflections this morning. This panel will also provide reflections on the successes and learning from the Stages project. And it is my real privilege to be facilitating this panel, as Stages is one of the Girls Education Challenge's flagship projects and a real success story. So I'd like to first start with sort of introductions of the panelists themselves and their organizations. And since one of the aims of this panel is to reflect on the great work of Stages over the last 7 years, I'd like to ask the panelists to also provide one positive reflection from working on the Stages project, as well as perhaps one challenge that you'd like to comment on. And if you can keep it brief, we'd be very grateful. So why don't we start with Mumtaza from Save the Children.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you, Sharon. My name is Dr. Mumtaza Abdurazakova, and I'm Program Director at Save the Children International. And I have privilege to lead Stages program at Save the Children. I'm based in Afghanistan. So answering your question regarding the highlights, I would say that there is the millions of different. It's very how to say, a very energetic program. But I mean, a significant a significant proportion of our supported girls are adolescent girls. In safe classes, about 77% of them, the adolescent age between 12 to 18. So, and we distributed dignity kits to that girls, and 82 of respondents reported to improve their classes attendance after using their usable pads. I think it's a very kind of very bright example, and the challenges, a lot of also challenges, mostly of course security. Current challenge, recent challenge we have a problem with handing over like about 100 girls to the government schools, because there is a very the government schools are closed due to security. So that's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mumtaza. Thanks very much. Why don't we move to our next panelist, Salam Yar from CARE. Please, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, this is Abdul Nasser Salamiar. I'm working as Stages Project Manager for CARE Afghanistan. It was very privilege and honor for me to work in a program that we are able to provide quality education service to the most marginalized girls in target province of Afghanistan. And there were a lot of challenges. One of the key challenges that we recently faced was COVID-19 that really negatively impact our education program activities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Samuel. Why don't we move to Rebecca from Catholic Relief Services? Rebecca.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Heemstra, and I am an education program manager for CRS in Afghanistan. And a highlight for me has been getting to visit classes in the field and see the impact on adolescent girls as I live in the mountains of Ghor province in Afghanistan. And a challenge for me has been seeing the worsening security context, which has meant we have less access to our classes. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. And let's move to Qurban Ali from Aga Khan Education Services.
Hello everyone, my name is Qurban Ali Waizi. I work as the head of academics with the Aga Khan Education Services Afghanistan. Being an agency of the Aga Khan Development Network, AKES, is one of the largest private, not-for-profit educational networks working in the developing world. As for the program highlights, I believe the Stages program has been able to support the most marginalized girls and boys in the highly remote communities. We are talking about communities that no telephone signal, no internet connection is working. And as for the challenges, we have always had the challenge of finding qualified teachers to implement the program. Of course, we had a number of mitigation strategies to mitigate this challenge, one of which was to introduce an extensive teacher professional development program into the project. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kamal Ali. And last but certainly not least, Jan Ali from Aga Khan Foundation, Afghanistan.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Ali Intizar. I'm Education Manager with Aga Khan Foundation, Afghanistan, responsible for the program implementation and operation. I'm very happy that we have enrolled and support more than 47,000 girls in remote communities to the community-based education class under this stage phase 1 and stage phase 2 project. And there was one big challenge actually, that we supported only one cohort of the children in each community. So still there are another cohort of the students, children that don't have access to the education program.
Great, thank you. Thank you for those reflections, and thank you for our panelists and their introductions. So I will move swiftly along to some questions for our panels. And I'd like to start with Mumtaza from Save the Children. And Mumtaza, can you tell us a bit more about the consortium? How did the consortium come into being, and how has it been working together as a group? I'd love to hear your reflections.
Thank you very much, Sharon. This is exactly the question I wanted to respond. Thank you. Okay, well, being such a close consortium of partners has been critical to our impact and success for several reasons. First of all, I wanted to stress scale. We have all been in Afghanistan for decades. I mean, our organizations for decades. And we split across different provinces. So together we have been able, because of this consortium, to deliver the same program across 16 provinces of Afghanistan and reach over 210,000 girls. The scale is rare. And I would say that also, I mean, the consortium provides a value for money, cost effectiveness, and sustainable, high quality education for most marginalized girls at scale. And I believe that our combined complementary strength provides unique comparative advantage over other organizations attempting to individually implement CB and girls' education at local levels. As a consortium, we're leveraging a broader base of technical expertise and experience. We were able to combine our in-country and global expertise in various elements of education programming, formal, non-formal education, vocational training, working with adolescent, girls, social inclusion, child protection, internal monitoring. So we had a huge experience, all of us, on that, and we combined this experience and expertise. So we developed new approaches and contextualized our global expertise, as I said, and we share that with each other in the consortium. And I'm not going to bring examples because of a shortage of time, but there were many, many different approaches which we develop or contextualize and share with each other to strengthen each other. And in order to implement this in our provinces and the provinces we were implementing, this gave us a ground to develop a comprehensive program that we deliver all together. And due to this joint and collaborative work, we were able to deliver several quite complex components. And I think that probably my colleagues from other organizations, our partners, will really describe that components. But actually, the main components, which I think very important to be in such consortium and share the capacity features, the expertise, because very important is we supported girls and boys through grades 1 to 9. We established and supported a number of accelerated learning program classes for girls who has missed the opportunity to join government schools due to different reasons, and we also introduced a diverse range of out-of-school activities. This is the biggest out-of-school activities is the biggest part of our program altogether. In addition to CBs, we supported several hundred government schools to enable their environment, prepare them to be able to absorb more students and organize education process. So all the things were possible because we were together, I believe. And while working on stages 2 proposal, we decided that each partner will take the lead on particular technical aspect of the program. So, and this was a good decision, and it worked very well. We also helped each other within the consortium to build capacity of our project staff working in new program areas in stages 2. And we just conducted numerous different trainings and workshops, and technical knowledge has been gained from sharing best practice by consortium partners already implementing activities in these areas. This was very also important activity, and I think that equal voices, which was the most important thing, I think, and it worked greatly. That traditionally, in consortium and large contracts, there is a clear lead partner, the direct strategy and design. Whilst we have this legally outlined in our contract, our structure was set up to ensure that each partner is an equal participant. It has been a true partnership where everyone has a voice. And that worked very greatly. We together jointly influence policy and practice. Stages partners maintained an active presence in all senior level policy discussions to ensure that our program objectives shape government priorities. The PMU representing the consortium to the MOE in consortium related issues. However, partner organizations are also active in different working groups and engage with various departments within the ministry and communicate on this in different affairs. For instance, like through Save the Children, the Stages Consortium has a direct connection to Afghanistan education in emergency working group, and it helped really much during the lockdown, during the difficult moment when the consortium provided some support to the Ministry of Education and coordinated with the partners through this working group. And my last point, I think that drawing on the collective expertise of the consortium and utilizing the evidence generated so far and will continue to generate going forward, consortium partners are all committed to seeking the opportunities to inform and drive the global discourse of girls' education in fragile context through presentation of our approaches and results in various forms, conferences, policy papers, online resources, as we do it today. So I think that answers.
Thank you, Mumtaza. Thanks very, very much. Just conscious of time as well. So if we can all keep our reflections brief as well, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. So our next question, I'm going to ask Salimyar and Janali. What were some of the key elements of the program that made it successful? What were your reflections on that?
Well, thank you very much. This is not just a program that provides education and classes. We have delivered a program beyond setting up classes in the community. Our Stages Consortium made up of NGOs who have experience in multiple sectors, and we could use this knowledge to bring to Stages 2. And we had very strong engagement of community actors such as religious scholars, community leaders, community development council, and a school shura to advocate and to support girls' rights for education and to enhance awareness of community people about importance of girls' education and other important issues such as combating corporal punishment and violence against women and girls. We have received a huge amount of community contribution. Over 509,000 hours of time have been donated to support this project and girls' education through voluntary time of SMC member and labor time to improve classroom facilities. School showers were instrumental in difficult and challenging time, whether due to COVID-19 or security threats. Stages partners have received a vast number of letters from communities requesting to establish more classes. There are huge demand, acceptance, and engagement, and they really want this project. The project also focused on empowering girls through extracurricular activities such as peer group activities and girls leadership to develop girls' self-esteem, self-confidence, and enable them to make better decisions in their life and raise their voice, asking their right for education, and overall to be active member of their society, to be a change agent. This program have delivered this through different extracurricular activity. Not only that, we have been able to develop and implement menstrual hygiene management to adolescent girls. This helped them to prevent 5 days missing of their continuous education during a month. And we also provided girls with PPE and hygiene kits. And most importantly, what we did was a holistic package that each component was very critical to success of this program. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Salamyar. Janali, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Addition to what Salamyar pointed, another successful aspect of the program was working closely with the local education offices, I mean provincial education department, district education department, and the government schools. They were engaged in all process of to identify the communities, find eligible children, establish classes, and enroll children to the CB classes. This PD and DED, I mean provincial education department and district education department, they have recognized the community shura classes as outreach classes of the nearest hub government schools. In addition, the community class were improved the quality and teaching learning there in the community-based education program as well in the government schools. We trained the school shura, school teachers, school management, and we provided some learning resource for the government schools. In addition, with support of the Economic Inclusion Unit, we have linked girls with some future opportunities. We provided like training, technical and vocational classes for some of the students, adolescent students, and linked them with the local market to sell their products. For other young women, we have provided like apprenticeship program to prepare them to work in community-based education classes in remote communities and as well in government schools after the project finished and ended. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for those details. Really interesting. My next question is for Kaban Ali. How would you, in your reflections, how did you push the boundaries in this project?
Thank you, Sharon. You know, this girls' education program, the name indicates that the project should only include girls, but in Afghanistan, we included both girls and boys because of mainly 2 reasons. One of them is the remoteness. You know, we are working in highly remote areas where government schools do not exist. We are working in highly remote communities where the basic education service is not available. And I would like to stress here that the consortium partners, all these consortium partners, have a strong presence in the community as a result of several projects and programs that they have implemented. My colleagues, including Matt, mentioned that this stages program was quite flexible. Indeed, it was flexible right at the beginning of the establishment of the classes and programs at the community level. We received this feedback from our field teams that boys are also out of school. So what should we do with them? And then we communicated this to the higher ups, to our colleagues, to the design team, and we communicated this with the donor, and luckily, everyone agreed that boys should be also included in this project. Another reason is why we included boys and we pushed boundaries for inclusion of boys into the girls' education project was to gain the support and buy-in from boys, from adolescent boys, from men. These students, we included them in the classes, and also 50% of the community school shura members were also men. They supported this project. If we really did not include boys into our girls' education project, these boys would not support the education of their sisters and family members. This action, of course, was in alignment with the do no harm policy that all of these consortium members are abiding by. Throughout the phase 1 and 2 of the stages program, we have been able to support over 30,000 girls and over 14,000 boys. These are the direct support that we provided to out-of-school children. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Really interesting. Our next question is for Mumtaza and Janali. What are some of the innovative solutions that Stages successfully tested and can be proud of?
Sharon, thank you very much. There is a plenty of different solutions, and they're all of them successful, I believe. Let me today our previous speakers, they were speaking about that importance of female teachers. That's what we do in the consortium, and this is a model which was developed and proposed by Save the Children and was picked up by Aga Khan. So now Aga Khan and Save the Children, we implement one component in Stages, which is called Glitter, Girls Learning to Teach, and it's addressing a big issue, which is in Afghanistan, is lack of professional teachers, and especially lack of female teachers. Because of even girls only schools face a lack of female teachers, and many schools have only male teachers. And the culture in Afghanistan is parents and communities that prefer when the teacher is female for girls. So, and it's really a big issue, and lack of female teachers is both a cause and effect of low participation of girls in education. Since qualified female teachers are mostly located in urban centers, and the girls in rural and remote communities are the most marginalized in terms of both access and quality of education. So the model which we develop, and we we design, then we do a regular research and surveys, and we also several times adapted it, and improve that, and the materials and everything. So, and this for 20-25 weeks, program that delivers during non-school hours and trains girls on important topics. Save the Children developed foundation of teaching course models, which was well welcomed by the partners, and now we use this course models, and there is important sections in that model, such as child development, lessons planning, how to teach reading or math, and there is a lot of components, and which the materials are in line with the teachers' competencies required by the Ministry of Education of Afghanistan. And after completion of each cohort, we're conducting tracer study, and as per the tracer study, the recent one which we had 2 months ago, there is a 45% of GLITA graduates were employed as CB teachers. Actually, it's a training, it's course to be a paraprofessional teacher, you know, and 45% employed as a CB teachers, and 49 of them employed in the government, 49% of them employed in the government schools, and 40% graduates on the graduate continue to study in the chosen field even after the conclusion of the program. So they continue education in teachers training colleges or universities, and we also support to those who continue, who study at girls who moving to the teachers training colleges. So it's also part of that component, and teachers training colleges are receiving also support for teachers training colleges currently in supported by stages. We establish resource centers and materials in national languages in partnership with Canadian Women to Women. So, and I would say that it's very a good model. GLIT is certified by provincial and district authorities. They recognize and signing certificates together with us, but the accreditation with the Ministry of Education is pending, and still a lot of work ahead. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Momtaza. And a great name for also a great intervention. If you could also bend your camera down just a little bit so we could see your face, that would be wonderful. Janali, did you want to add as well your reflections?
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, I want to highlight two innovations that implemented by the Aga Khan Foundation. One is the multi-grade teaching classes. Actually, based on the Ministry of Education policy, we are allowed to establish new classes in communities that there should be at least 10 or more children, eligible children for one grade. In Afghanistan, actually, there are many communities with a small population, so we cannot find 10 children or more than that to enroll them in one grade. So the Aga Khan Foundation Afghanistan introduced it and piloted an alternative education approach, this multi-grade teaching class, to allow students in different age and grades to learn together in one classroom. Like we included grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3 in one classroom. Overall, we have piloted 139 multi-grade classes under this stage 2. In each year, we enroll it like less than 10 students in each grade. This program has many advantages, like all the children in communities with a small population have access to education. You can, by one teacher, we can run 3 grades in one class, and the cost is less than in the single classes. Also, this finding under this stage midline study report shows that multi-grade class students' learning outcomes are the same as single grade classes. So we can implement in all communities with the small population as well in the government schools. Another initiative approach that we have, this is flexible response fund. You know that there are many barriers to girls' education in Afghanistan, such as distance between the community and government schools, especially for the secondary schools. So shortage of the female teacher in secondary schools, another barriers for the girls' education. Another issue is that barriers is different from one community to another community and from one situation to other situation. So we discussed it with the community members and community elders and with the CDC, I mean the Community Development Councils, to identify the barriers of the girls' education and find the best solution. And then we provided them some grants to solve this issue, like they provided transportation for primary girls to have access to secondary, and for some adolescents to have access to the teacher training college. In addition, we provided some fund for the rehabilitation of the schools and the classroom. These are some initiatives by the Aga Khan Foundation Afghanistan. So actually, it was not possible to implement these projects without support of the Ministry of Education as well, with the support of the community.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Janali. My next question is for Rebecca and Kabanali. I mean, certainly given the impacts of COVID-19 globally, would really value your reflections on how COVID-19 impacted your work and how did you respond?
Thank you. Yeah, COVID-19 was a very challenging time for education in Afghanistan, as schools in Afghanistan were closed from March until September of last year, and the academic year usually starts in March, meaning that the country missed almost an entire academic year. And so as all of our students live in inaccessible areas with very limited internet or TV access, our students were not able to participate in government remote learning programs. The risk that dropout would increase exponentially if we didn't do something very quickly was very high. And so as a consortium, we had to rapidly pivot to find ways to continue engaging students. We developed a remote learning program that was paper-based, where we distributed paper-based learning packets to students monthly. We also had teachers communicate and support students via phone. And we also had to suspend our regular teacher trainings as we couldn't hold in-person teacher trainings. So we developed a remote teacher training program using a program called Interactive Voice Response, which is a platform that allowed us to deliver key information to teachers via simple phones. There was no smartphones or internet needed. We covered key topics like at-home learning and dropout prevention. During COVID-19, we also saw the really critical role that communities played because we weren't able to be in villages physically often. So we had to rely on school committees and make sure that we had their support for students continuing their education. And all of our work with parents, school committees, teachers, local leaders over the previous years really paid off during COVID-19 because they were the ones on the ground ensuring that students were completing remote learning, and they were the ones delivering key messages. One other thing to note is that at the start of the COVID-19 crisis, we did a rapid gender assessment to shape our response, and because we wanted to understand the realities for girls on the ground. We did find that almost all students were continuing studies at home, but one notable finding was also that girls reported very high levels of severe anxiety given the closure of schools and all of the uncertainty around school reopening. And so in response, we incorporated psychosocial support activities and psychological first aid training for teachers. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Kabanali, did you want to add anything?
Yes. Thank you, Rebecca. I would like to expand on the home-based learning project, our COVID-19 response plan. I would like to talk about the design of that mini project. You know, when the pandemic hit Afghanistan, all international organizations, including the Stages consortium members, thought of an alternative solution, a solution that could be acted and implemented quickly, and at the same time to be reaching out to the majority of the students. You know, we were thinking of the Google Classroom, we were thinking of, you know, Zoom, the very Zoom that we are using now. We were thinking of, you know, different communication platforms, but, you know, considering the realities on the ground, you know, our beneficiaries are located in very, very remote areas. We decided to go for you know, developing self-learning and self-instructional packages, and also complementing it by phone tutorials in areas that the telephone signal was available. So we immediately chose our model. Our model was, you know, paper-based, developing paper-based, you know, self-learning and self-instructional materials, which were, you know, engaging, fun, and, you know, reinforcing the school subjects. We quickly formed different task forces and working groups. They developed worksheets and materials, and we distributed to the community members. In areas where the telephone signal was available in AKS, within AKS, we distributed both SIM cards to both teachers and students, and we put them into a communication package. They call it a closed user group, of which, you know, both teachers and students can communicate with unlimited you know, minutes and hours. That approach, both within the consortium, across the consortium, and also within AKS, has been a very successful approach. And we were able to reach out to thousands of children, including girls. In addition to this, we were able to also you know, distribute COVID-19 kits, which included you know, soap, sanitizer, and masks. This very, you know, the story of this program design has been recognized as one of the most successful solutions, and it has been published on the AKDN website. I would share the link in the chat. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Moving swiftly on, because we're running out of time, I would like to ask the next question to Rebecca and Salamir. What do you think will sustain or be sustained after the program ends this summer? And what are your concerns about things that might not be sustained after the program ends?
Thank you for your question. I'll start by just touching on our approach to sustainability. It's multifaceted, and then I'll touch on things that will last after the project ends. So first, we do extensive work with government schools and the government system to build their capacity to take over our classes when the project ends. We do school improvement projects at schools, and we also train government school teachers. We also work with parents to ensure they feel comfortable sending their children. Second, we really focus on giving voice to communities. Communities we found are powerful drivers of sustainability because they do initiate action at the government level. We have great examples of this where communities really took action and we saw results. For example, this year in Gore province, 5 of the communities we work with got together and formally requested that the government establish a new school. They submitted the request, they donated land. The request was approved, and already there's budget allocated this year from the government for grade 1 teachers at a new school. Third, we see that government planning is really critical to our program, and we work so closely with local government to plan on a very granular level and doing it early to align with budgeting cycles. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, and we've had to be creative in terms of finding strategies for each of our classes. One thing that we've piloted is what we call partial handover, where if the government isn't ready to take over one of our classes yet, we share responsibilities for an additional period of time. Maybe we pay teacher salaries, the government provides textbooks until the government can fully take over. One thing to note is that it's about government capacity to take over at the end of the day. And this doesn't happen overnight. Results from the Stages Endline survey were promising that over 60% of girls that participated in Handover to the government actually continued their education at government schools. But Stages was able to achieve this because it's been an 8-year project, and we've worked so closely with government and the communities over those 8 years. And that's why these multi-year projects and investments are really impactful. You know, community-based education should really be targeting the most remote, marginalized communities. As NGO actors, we're not competing with the government. We're focused on filling a very specific need. And so we like to say, at the end of a project, if you don't have a sustainability challenge, you're probably not targeting the right communities. You're not targeting the most marginalized communities, which means that Handover will always be challenging, and it will take a long time. We need to be patient and work with the government. We can't rush the process. We have a great example from Western Gore where CRS started working in a community over 10 years ago with community-based education, and we've seen incremental but lasting change. The communities requested the government to build a school, and they did, and now students are attending the government school, and there's not a need for community-based education for primary school. Briefly, 2 things that will sustain after the project ends. So first, like we've already talked about, is student learning. The benefits of education are well known in global education research about health impacts, about improved or increases in income for every additional year of education, delays in early marriage. But education is also about human dignity. It is a human right. And I remember meeting a parent, an illiterate parent in Bamiyan province, who told me that she was afraid to go to health clinics because previously she had gone and accidentally taken the ID card of her child instead of herself because she couldn't read her own name, and she was mocked at the health clinic, and she never wanted to go back. And education is really about human dignity. But second, a lasting impact of the project is perception shift. We are finding that communities are demanding education or wanting education. There's a shift in the context from 20 years ago in Afghanistan, and CRS gets hundreds of requests from communities to establish new schools or new classes or to continue their classes. And this bottom-up shift and this push is really powerful because it forces the government to rethink how they allocate resources. And it's not a reversible change. Once you've done education in a community and people see the impact, it has a domino effect in communities and neighboring communities who hear about it. They want more. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Salamia, did you want to add your reflections on sustainability?
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about our concern for the things that may not sustain once the program closes. Sustainability is not just girls continuing their education, those girls that we focus during Stages intervention, but focusing more on future cohorts to head into education and enroll in education. There's still a long journey to achieve complete sustainability. Sustainability cannot be achieved through 1 or 2 cycles of funding. Things happen that change the environment, such as COVID-19. We have talked a lot about how emerging crisis results temporary gap to education. This temporary gap leave girls vulnerable and make them to fully drop out from continuation of the education. The same is true with our program. Stages 2 project or stages throughout 7 years of implementation have made a substantial progress in terms of sustainability and have built a lot of momentum. Unfortunately, when the program stopped supporting some of the areas that we have spent a lot of time and invested a lot with support of provincial district education department, with district education department, unfortunately, a downward trajectory will start again. When we come to talk about Afghanistan context, currently peace negotiation is going on with a lot of uncertainty, and Afghanistan has always been seen as dynamic and as emerging situation for donors, and unfortunately, donors are increasingly reluctant to invest in long-term project by considering the uncertainty which is ongoing, and they might change their funding strategy after contextual factors. In terms of our CB students, though we have hand over the CB students to the governmental school, but some of the CB students will not be able to continue their education to the governmental school due to various reasons, such as very long distance of community from the nearest governmental school, lack of female teachers, lack of girls teacher, lack of girls school, and economical problem and migration to other areas. Unfortunately, some of our CB teachers will be unemployed after project closed out due to limited job opportunities to be hired as teacher by INWI. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Salamyar. I am conscious of time, so I have one last question, and I'll just call on Jan Ali, if you wouldn't mind, and then we'll take one question from the participants. What is one thing that you would say is the most important to take forward in future girls' education programming, Jan Ali?
Thank you, Sharon. I want to mention 2 points. One, for the number of students that we supported them from grade 1 up to grade 6 or grade 9. So we need to provide support them to have access to secondary education. And as well in the communities that we implement in this stage 1 and stage 2, we need to support the new cohort of the children, maybe through external fund or work with the community. We should have community mobilization that they should do fundraising, and as well we should work with the Ministry of Education to support the children in remote communities through having this outreach classes.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks very much. I will take one question from participants, and Qurban Ali, since you were talking about having worked in some of the remote areas, I'll pass this on to you. Can you share some of the strategies and messages that have worked well in managing men's engagement, communities' engagement in the process of ensuring buy-in to the Stages program and ensuring that girls were enrolled in the program? And then particularly, what sort of mediums were used to pass on these messages and strategies in the most remote areas? Would value your thoughts.
Thanks for the question. One very successful intervention that we have been implementing as part of the Stages program has been the social audit activity. Within this social audit activity, which is implemented twice a year, we invite a representative group of the community members. We invite representatives from the community leaders, from the youth, from women, from religious leaders, influential community members, like a group of 40, 50 people. We collect them in one place, and then we review our project interventions and activities, and then we create a space for sharing. We create a space for the community members so that they share their comments, their concerns, their suggestions, all those issues, project issues, all those inputs from the community are recorded and compiled, and then a detailed action plan is developed to address those inputs. I believe this social audit has been a very successful platform that we used, and through that we ensured support and buy-in from the community members, as well as we adapted our project to the realities on the ground and the community needs. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. You're absolutely right. Consultation and really does help, engagement and buy-in, particularly with male community members and leaders. So really thoughtful, and thank you for that. I'm going to wrap up and, first and foremost, thank all of the panelists for your very thoughtful reflections. I know that I've been quite inspired. I think that this model of this consortium is so powerful, not only because you each bring a different sort of technical strength and area to the consortium, but then you all benefit. And so that makes the model quite comprehensive. And then you can take that model and bring it to scale to 16 provinces. And that's really quite impressive. So thank you so much for all of the work and contribution that you've done for the girls in Afghanistan and boys, as well as the Girls Education Challenge. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much again for the opportunity to facilitate this panel. So thank you, and over to you, Akila.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much for facilitating that conversation so well. And thank you to the Stages partners for that lively discussion. I had the opportunity of working incredibly closely with the Stages partners, particularly as we pivoted to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Working with such passionate and incredibly bright personalities was definitely one of the highlights of my career. So thank you to the Stages team for your honesty and insights. We're going to take a short comfort break here. We will resume in 10 minutes and move on to our next set of discussions, hopefully with Afghanistan's Ministry of Education, FCDO, and USAID. So more riveting discussions to come. So please join us back after a short 10-minute break.
break.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you were all able to grab your second or third cup of coffee or green tea. It is a great honor to present our next speaker, Her Excellency, the Minister of Education, Ms. Ranjina Hamidi. After emigrating from Afghanistan to Pakistan and then onwards to the USA, Her Excellency returned to her country where she has worked for over 2 decades to better the lives of Afghan citizens through development projects, advocacy, and most importantly, education. Most recently, Her Excellency successfully led the Mizan International School to integrate and implement a world-class and internationally accredited curriculum with a solid foundation of Islamic education, Afghan history, Afghan values, and multilingual education. She has also been recognized internationally for her work with women. I request Her Excellency, the Minister of Education, to please deliver her keynote reflecting on achievements made in girls' education and future commitments. Your Excellency, over to you.
Good afternoon. It is truly an honor to be here. Thank you, Ms. Dato, and everybody else who has organized this program, and to the Aga Khan Foundation for inviting me. Apologies that I was not able to join in a bit earlier, even though I had planned on it. It's not easy being a Minister of Education in such uncertain times in Afghanistan, and particularly as a woman. And then to add icing on the cake, I've started a Islahat, which is reform agenda at the ministry, which keeps me much more busy than I had envisioned. So thank you for your time. I will begin with a personal story to share with all the viewers and listeners of this program. I myself was a refugee child, an Afghan refugee child who grew up in Pakistan. And although my father and mother believed in education for their girls because they grew up in an era where it didn't matter what the gender of a child was, education was a right and education was a privilege that was given to children by families who thought that education was important. And so even though we grew up as refugee children in a country that was not our own, but my father went to the limits of even borrowing money to enroll me and my little sister in a private institution because he believed that our future needed education. Interestingly enough, we were banned from going to school by elements at that time who did not think that education was important for little girls. And that decision of outside forces forced my father to immigrate even further and ended up settling in the United States of America through the refugee program with UNHCR in 1988, which enabled myself and my little sister and then my younger brothers to continue our education. And today, even though my father is not on this earth with us anymore, I know that his spirit is very much happy, because if he had allowed the entities that did not want his daughter to be educated in the early 1980s, his daughter would not be the Minister of Education in a country like Afghanistan. And I'm proud to say, not because of me as Ranjina Hamidi, but I'm proud to say that an Afghan little girl, or once upon a time I was an Afghan little girl, has the opportunity to lead one of the most critical institutions in the government of Afghanistan, which is the Ministry of Education. And if you can just take this story or this anecdote as motivation for understanding, and I cannot emphasize enough on how important it is to enable girls to be able to achieve their potential, their dreams. And yes, not all of them might become ministers or great figures, but the fact of the matter is that we won't know which potential exists until we give it a chance. And so I'm thankful to my parents, particularly my father, for fighting a culture and a system that enabled his daughter to reach the level that I have. And I count, and this is part of my personal agenda as Minister of Education, to not plead, but to encourage and to promote many parents, particularly fathers, to encourage their girls to not only start school, but finish school. So I just wanted to begin by making a statement personally that this mission and vision of girls' education and empowerment of girls through education is a personal mission of myself. To go back to the achievements of education in Afghanistan in the past 20 years, a lot has been done. And I owe a lot of this great achievement to our international partners, donors, people who are absolutely interested in continuing their support in education, particularly for girls in Afghanistan. But also I owe a big thank you to the government of Afghanistan throughout the past 20 years, but particularly the current government, because our current president is truly a promoter of women's rights, education for women, opportunities for girls. Having such a leader at the highest, most position, someone who makes it a personal mission to continuously encourage and promote women's inclusion in governance is a huge plus point that the international community really needs to take a note of, because without such support, we women would continue to be only filling symbolic positions, which we've seen in the past and which we continue to see. But I'm thankful for the government's commitment to promoting women's and girls' rights across Afghanistan. So yes, we have, today we are lucky to announce and say that we have the greatest number of students in the education sector. And about 40% of those, I'm told, of our students is girls, which is a huge development in the education sector, but we still have a long way to go. So while we've done wonders and we've done great work in the past 20 years of increasing the numbers of girls, challenges continue to face us, that the majority of those girls are in the primary grade level, so from grade 1 to 6. We start, once girls go beyond grade 6, we start seeing a decline in the number of girls, because we are a conservative society, we are a traditional society, and many girls end up dropping out of school for multiple reasons. The primary one being not having female teachers in schools above grade 7. Which is a major challenge, particularly in areas that are hard to reach or that are not easily accessible. Second, the marriage age in Afghanistan for young girls continues to drop, unfortunately. More and more people are marrying their girls more, younger and younger, and that tradition unfortunately interferes with girls wanting to continue education. Many of them are lucky to finish even 12th grade if they're not able to continue to higher education. So we still have a lot of challenges, and we at the Ministry of Education are constantly working, particularly with the new team on board, management team, where it is our priority to reach out to the greatest number of girls that we possibly can, and also make it feasible and enable women to be hired as teachers to go and teach girls in communities where they might not have organic teachers in their communities. So perhaps an incentive program for female teachers, it's something that has been tried out in the past and has been successful. So I'm personally trying to find mechanisms to be able to find female teachers to go and teach in communities where girls are simply pulled out of school because of the lack of female teachers. Excuse me. I recognize that the Stages project contribution in Afghanistan is addressing this particular issue of not having female teachers, and I'm thankful for the donors of that program. It's doing wonders, and we've been very lucky to get the approval of the president to extend this program to exactly 1,000 additional female teachers for communities where female teachers don't exist. So that's a wonderful program, and I encourage everyone who's working on that program to continue supporting it, because it is giving us results. The commitment to girls' education, I don't need to reiterate. You're hearing from me personally that yes, I am not only responsible for only girls' education, I have to be serving everybody, all my boys and girls, but just the nature of my gender and myself as a female minister, it is my utmost personal priority to enable the future girls of Afghanistan to be able to not just fill in positions, as I luckily have today, but become active citizens and decision makers of their society at whatever level they may be active in. You don't have to be a minister necessarily to bring about changes to the community at the community level, but it certainly has its benefits, because when you are a minister of an entity that employs over 270,000 personnel, and being a strong female, it does help to put some pressure points on a lot of the men who might not agree with me all the time. So it does help to be in positions. We are working as a team on the National Education Strategic Plan 4. We value all the input that has been put into that paper or that program so far, and we're looking to incorporate our reform plan into this strategic plan, so that the future of Afghanistan, or the future of the Education Ministry of Afghanistan, has incorporated the reform agenda that we have set and approved by the president into the strategic plan, so that if, even if I'm not here for much longer in the future, the next minister will be able to continue with the reform agenda, and the focus on girls' education will continue, which is a core element of our reform agenda. And finally, I encourage everybody to please continue investing in girls' education. I appreciate and am thankful to a lot of your investments. There are some wonderful projects across Afghanistan that promote girls' education, but I cannot say how important and how much, the more we invest, the more we need. The wonderful thing is, and I'll conclude my remarks with this beautiful story which brought tears to my eyes. 3 days ago, an old man from a small little, not province, but a district in Daikundi, which is currently under a lot of trouble politically, because access to education and insecurity, access to education is not very available, and then the insecurity in the region makes it that much harder. And the village elder had traveled all the way to Kabul to ask to come and meet with the minister and beg me, because there's only 3 schools in that district, and these are schools that were built in the 1950s and 60s from the government back then, and the structures have fallen down and the structures have deteriorated, but they continue to want to bring little kids to the schools. And because of the fact that they don't have teachers, male or female, it's been a week since the schools have started. Officially, the school year has started, but their schools have not been opened because they don't have teachers in that community. And he came all the way from his little town to beg me to help him open schools and bring little girls even to school. So when you have that level of commitment, after 20 years of investment, I think that is more than enough for the international community to see that communities that would have never even dreamt of having education or investing in education, they're now coming on a daily basis from areas that are hard to reach, from areas that are fragile security-wise and otherwise. They're begging the Ministry of Education to invest in schools, to build schools, to find them teachers, to give them books. I think that's an incredible step forward, and I'm proud to be serving this ministry at a time that is critical, especially particularly as we face the future of the political settlement that might bring changes to the structure of Afghanistan, but I'm proud to be able to serve my country, to serve my people, and particularly serve my little girls, because until we stand up to serve together, it is hard to expect little girls to reach where they need to reach, with that on their own. So thank you for your attention. I think I've spoken more than I needed to. I am at your service. If there's anybody in Afghanistan, outside of Afghanistan, who's interested in continuing to commit to and serve Afghanistan's education sector, I'm more than happy to meet with you, to discuss with you, to talk with you, because your support will continue to fulfill the dreams of millions of children in this country, particularly our girls. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We will take a little bit more of your time for the next session. Thank you for that incredibly passionate and heartfelt call for continued focus on girls' education in Afghanistan. I think it was incredibly inspiring to hear your personal story as well. We are truly delighted to be a partner with you in our goal to ensure every girl in Afghanistan has access to quality education. So for our next session, we did something a bit unique. We wanted to ensure we hear from the voices of those that are at the heart of our work and without whom Stages truly would not be what it is. We sit here and we talk about the challenges of implementing a program, but they are the ones driving that change within their communities. So AKF and our Stages partners, we reached out to our stakeholders in Afghanistan, young girls, teachers, and community members to gather their questions for the Ministry of Education and FCDO. We will use these as a basis for the next Q&A session with Her Excellency and Laura Branley, Education Advisor at FCDO Afghanistan. We will open up questions to the audience as well, so use that Q&A chat box. We are trying to get to these questions as quick as possible. Just a quick note about Laura. Laura has a wealth of experience in undertaking research on how aid, public finance, and public-private partnerships can be used to deliver education services effectively. She has worked in a range of countries, Uganda, Rwanda, and Cambodia, just to name a few, and has worked both within and beyond governments. I will now hand over to Aurore Dorelian, Basic Education Team Lead at USAID Afghanistan, to facilitate our Q&A session with Her Excellency and Laura Branley. Aurore, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is definitely an honor to be facilitating this conversation with Your Excellency, Acting Minister of Education, and Laura Branley from FDCO. We really appreciate this opportunity to learn more about the Ministry of Education's priorities regarding girls' education, and also hearing from the partners' perspective on how we can support the Ministry of Education to really move the needle forward on this issue. As you previously mentioned, I'll be raising questions that we received from young girls across Afghanistan. The first one is directed to Your Excellency, the Ministry of Education, and then also FDCO. Many of the questions we received from young girls were about their strong desire in continuing their education, not just for themselves, but also for their younger siblings. However, barriers continue to exist, such as distance from home to community-based education, CBEs, shortage of female teachers, and lack of access to secondary schools. Given the growing demand for education, how does the Ministry of Education and the donor community aim to continue to ensure access to education, particularly in such remote areas? And if we could start with Your Excellency, Acting Minister Hamidi.
Thank you. It's a wonderful question, and thank you for asking. This, as you noted in my talk just a couple minutes before, this continues to be a major problem. The CBE program, Community-Based Education Program, is a wonderfully, and I personally had the privilege before becoming minister to go and monitor some of the CBE classes across the country. I've gone to far out villages in Jalalabad and Kandahar and Herat and in Mazar Sharif to understand and to see the impact that this program was making. The good thing is that the desire from the community to continue such a program is definitely there. Of course, there's limitations with it because the program is only designed for up to grade 3 right now, even though in some places where access to a hub school to connect the CBE to a hub school, as the question rightfully stated, the distance is too long and girls still are not allowed. So I'm happy to consider and give a try to education experts across the globe, of course, with the help of our major partners. Laura, of course, is a wonderful partner here in the country, among others, to consider at expanding the CBE program to reconsider an opportunity for girls to continue education without having a school that they can link with and go to. I think it's possible. It's a matter of thinking creatively outside of the box. And I, as a responsible entity of the ministry at this point, am very open to creative and alternative methods of education. In fact, in my new reform tashkil or chart of work, sorry, it's hard to be multilingual because you think in one language and then the words come out in a different language. We've created a huge new directorate on alternative education methodologies or alternative ways of educating. And so having this directorate will be specifically focused on creating opportunities, helping to find opportunities for girls who don't have access to education. CB is important, but I think there might be other creative ways of enabling girls. And I want to end by saying that technology is definitely another tool and a pressure point from the president and the government at the top level to digitize our access, because areas that don't have access are, and we saw through the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, that the world is moving digitally forward, and it is time to invest in digital opportunities, because if nothing else works, the digital access to education might become the best way, particularly for girls who might not be able to leave their homes. And so my personal philosophy of how I've worked in Afghanistan always is, instead of asking the women to come out, break so many layers of norms and traditions to have access to either education or economic opportunities, I've always been a proponent and a promoter of taking services to the women in their homes, because once you enable women and open their minds and educate them and financially enable them, that freedom and that empowerment that they get in their home then opens doors without any complications with the men in their society. So technology might be our best option to move forward. And if Laura, if you would like to add more to this, I'd be happy to, if you want to.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for inviting me to participate and to passing over. And I just want to say at the start as well, it's been fantastic to answering some questions from the girls themselves who have been benefiting from the Stages program, and to hear directly from them and to be accountable to them for how we respond to their needs and to listen to what they want from us. I think it's been set out with over 3 million children still out of school here that this needs to be a joint effort. This needs to be a partnership with the Ministry of Education, with NGOs, with donors, and with other partners as well within the education sector. I think now is an ideal opportunity, with the planning that's going into the National Education Strategic Plan under the new reform agenda, to think about what that partnership looks like and how we can make the most of resources that we have available and think creatively to support some of this progress. I think that there's a lot of learning from programs such as Stages and others about how to really effectively deliver community-based education and how to support transition to schools when that is possible. And I think that we need to be building on more of that, linking up some of the conversations that we're having about education finance, decentralization, and how we plan collectively with our provincial and education district education officers, so that we have a coordinated approach. I think there are a few key opportunities that we see coming up. Firstly, some of the work under the ECRA program that's been working with the community-based education unit to deliver on the education, the CBE policy, and some of the costing and mapping and coordination frameworks around that. And I think that there are real opportunities to better coordinate and streamline what we're doing. And similarly, I know there's work on investment strategies for CBE and others to think about CBE beyond the 3 years that the Minister mentioned, and to think about how we can support girls through their whole life cycle. I would also just highlight in conclusion, I think some of the work that's been done that's really innovative amongst stages, and actually through one of our other GEC programs with BRAC on secondary level CBE, and how we can really expand our opportunities that we're giving to girls at secondary level when there's still such a drive and a passion for them to continue their education, but maybe there isn't a secondary option. And I think that this is a big area of learning and for us, and a challenge coming up as to how we can get better at supporting those secondary age girls who want to have their dream of completing secondary and going on to university and beyond. I'll pause there and back to you, Aurora.
Apologies. Sorry, I'm muting my mic. So the next question, it's also for the both of you, and we'll start with the Ministry of Education. And this again comes from the young girls throughout Afghanistan. 70% of the questions we received were regarding continued access to CBEs. I know we answered part of it in the first question, but given that the CBE model continues to be the preferred choice for communities right now, what are the views of the Ministry of Education on really building on that model in the years to come? And I know that you talked about the digital strategy, but what's your view on the CBE model currently?
Thank you, Aurora. Another wonderful question. As I said, I want to reiterate, I absolutely know the value of the CBE model. If we can expand it beyond grade 3, again, this is the creativity of how willing the international community is in supporting such programs, because we at the ministry, unfortunately, we have our own financial limitations. But it's a program that continues to show the success rate of children attending such programs. And if we're able to do this to grade 3, I don't see why we're not able to continue doing this up until grade 12. It's wishful thinking, but it's always good to dream big. And quite honestly, this model kind of fits in a very weird way the homeschool model of education that is quite powerful throughout the world. Many parents are opting out of sending their children to a physical school, which might be even near their communities, but they choose to educate their children at home by themselves. And so I see the CBE model as kind of a far out extension of the homeschooling model. And if it's going to achieve, and it has achieved, the results that this country needs to be able to provide access to education to communities where girls simply are either don't have access to a physical school or are not allowed to go to a physical school, even if it's in the near vicinity, because the cultural realities and the traditional realities of Afghanistan is something we have to work with. As a minister responsible for the entire country, 34 provinces with a variety of different cultures and customs that exist, it's very hard to create one policy and ask it to be implemented across the 34 provinces for obvious reasons. So I'm willing to personally commit to making the CBE available to girls for up until 12th grade, if we are able to create the mechanisms, find the finances for it, and train the teachers or find the teachers to be able to continue this model forward. There's absolutely no hesitation from the side of the Ministry of Education. I think the ball is in the court of the international community at this point to see how much they're willing to invest with us and work with us to make this model available to girls across the country.
So I think that brings us to Laura. And Laura, I think that's a great point for you to enter, and perhaps what is the role of the donor communities and other partners, and perhaps assisting or working with the Ministry of Education to really make sure that CBE and alternative models are accessible to everyone.
Yes, thanks. And I think it's a good challenge. I think that we recognize that a lot of the current CBE work takes place off budget and planned with the ministry essentially, and really closely planned, I think, with our provincial and district education partners. And I think that we need to be closing some of that gap, maybe between some of the central decisions that are being made about resourcing and how we're engaging and supporting the sector, and then how we're really responding to communities and their local needs, and how we're planning for education at a community level, and ensuring that the resources are going where they are needed most. I think it's also important to bear in mind why communities have maybe a preference for community-based education. A lot of it is where it's locally grounded and where communities know the teachers and they know the environment in which their girls are being educated, and I think that we can't underestimate that. I think there's also a lot of learning that we've had from our CBE experience to date about what enables successful transition into hub schools. And I think that as part of the answer, we need to be looking as well at what we're doing outside of CBE to support primary schools and secondary schools so that we are creating education pathways that are sustainable. We heard from the panelists earlier this morning about the importance of having community support for girls as they make this transition, and also where we've seen crossover in some of our projects, helping with joint teacher training between CBEs and the local schools, and to support to improving the learning environment in local hub schools and other initiatives that can support that transition. And I think that we need to be more intentionally incorporating that into our project design, and looking at more broadly how we're supporting the education ecosystem in those areas to support all children to learn, and where in different contexts, different approaches might be most suitable to the communities and what they and ultimately the girls and boys in those communities want. Back over to you.
Thank you. And then I do want to raise one question that came up in the chat room. It's just a little question more for Your Excellency, and it's regarding the digital strategy. And what does that look like, and what are you looking for donors and partners to support? So how can we use so it's more of a question on how can we use technology, and how is the Ministry of Education looking to work with other ministries to ensure that we can use alternative methods to reach remote communities? So to elaborate, is there a plan to invest in infrastructure to make sure that they have the resources?
Sure, thank you. Yes, I'm reading some of the questions and answers, or the questions that are typed in, and a lot of them are focused on the technology. The reality is that Afghanistan, as a nation, we still have a lot of structural problems. There are areas across the country that still don't even have electricity or access to 24-hour electricity, let alone internet and good reception, even via smartphones. But to compare us to a lot of our neighbors in the region, we're actually still a lot more advanced in technology and internet connectivity compared to some of our neighbors in this region. And so that's a green light for the opportunity that does exist. Now, true that the infrastructure still needs investment, and part of the current government's agenda and constant both pressure and stress is to digitize as much of our services, both at the top government level down to the bottom, and education. The education ministry is part of this overall government structure, and so we know that there's a push for becoming a digitized community. From the president down to us, it will help not only with accessibility, but it also helps address the many layers of corruption that exist still at different layers of government institutions, including the Ministry of Education. And in my recent speech on the first day of school, where we had the national program of opening our schools for this year 1400 in Afghanistan's calendar, I use the example of some of our students actually have to wait years and travel several times from their provinces to Kabul just to get their diploma. And if we can digitize their track record of 12 grades of studies and their marks, and use a digitized system that could then honor by giving a graduate their diploma, his or her diploma, within a week after graduation, that's one example of how we can expedite services to students using technology. We have challenges. I'm not denying, and I'm not trying to paint a beautiful picture of a utopia saying that everything's perfect in Afghanistan. But I think at this point, considering all of the security challenges, accessibility challenges, if we don't invest in infrastructural changes such as electricity and technology, we've been waiting 20 years and we still have a long way to go. I think we have no option but to invest in these two infrastructures to be able to make access to information and access to education a possibility, because it's the best point. And I, as a responsible entity of this organization, and my leadership team, we're committed to work with any partner who's willing to try this out. And I also know the reality that we're not going to have access to online education services tomorrow or within the next year. But if we can begin the process, learn, create models, learn where it works and what the challenges we may face, this will help in the long term in finding solutions to a much larger problem that we have, and perhaps begin with a community that doesn't have access right now, learn from it, and then hopefully if it succeeds, we will continue to provide that through to other communities. I hope I'm not sounding too hopeful or utopian, but I believe in this, and we at the ministry have decided to invest a lot more in technological infrastructure than we have ever in the past 20 years.
Thank you so much. And I think it's very helpful for us to really understand the Ministry of Education's vision for the next few years and really thinking what comes next. So we really do appreciate your comment and answer. I also want to ask a question that came up, and it's how do we link educating girls to what happens next? So after they enter schools, after they graduate primary school, what next? So is there a strategy to link education with vocational training so they can really benefit and contribute from what they learn in schools?
Aurora, is this question for me or for Laura?
For both, because there needs to be that linkage between education and communities. And then from the Ministry of Education side, it'll be good to know if there's a linkage or how can donors help to make that connection. So how can we support the Ministry of Education to make that linkage?
Laura, with your permission, I'll go first since I've unmuted myself. Thank you. Just to make it a bit clear, there is, I don't know exactly how long ago, but once upon a time, there was a 6th deputy ministryship at the Ministry of Education that was dedicated for TVET, technical vocational training. And since last year, or about a year and a half, that entity has separated and become an independent entity. and their mandate is to take students who are interested in pursuing technical and vocational studies beyond grade 9, because in the Constitution of Afghanistan, education is mandatory up until grade 9. It becomes optional beyond that. Even though we are promoting and working on completing 12th grades, but the Constitution says one thing and we're doing nothing against it, but really we cannot force somebody to come to school if they don't wish to after 9th grade. So the TVET component is taken separately and independently and addressed by TVET. And one thing I would like to reiterate here with all our partners and people who are interested in the Ministry of Education is to honor the streamlining of services. It is the mandate of TVET to provide technical and vocational education, and I would like them to lead that sector. We at the Ministry of Education, of course, will continue to become partners and facilitators in whatever capacity we can to help students achieve their specific desires of the field that they want to further their studies in. But our mandate at the Ministry of Education is the curriculum that we have, which is literacy, numeracy, science, the content that is our responsibility. And of course, we will continue to engage our students in programs such as there's a successful program for young girls actually, and boys too, the Tashabus, which is a entrepreneurship training program for students, I think, beyond grade 10, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So it's a program that encourages young kids at a very young age to consider entrepreneurship as a track of life, of a life skill that they should engage in. But at this point, I think the ministry has a lot on our plate, and I'm not rejecting technical, vocational, or the next steps for what our students need to do. But the academic progress, the quality education, because as I am actually concerned that a lot of our students that graduate 12th grade have a hard time even with basic literacy and numeracy. And that's a challenge that we need to address as the quality of education that we provide. And so that's my priority. And if we can add more to enhance our studies after addressing our primary goal, I'm happy to consider it. But I would like to make it clear that after 12th grade, how students decide to lead their life is something that we want to help in, but it's not our mandate at this ministry, and it's not our priority, because I want to be able to educate our children to the point where they will be then able to succeed by becoming fully literate, at least by the time they graduate 12th grade.
Thank you. And Laura, I do want to give you the option to respond. If not, I'll go to the next question.
No, thanks. I'll respond briefly. I think that I wanted to pick up on some of the points that Her Excellency made towards the end. I think about the potential that we have through curriculum reforms that I know are part of the ministry's agenda to think about some of the competencies that we're developing in children up until grade 9 and beyond to prepare them for the workforce, and to give them transferable skills and make sure that they're meeting kind of a minimum level of quality education so that they can then progress along. I know that the TVET authority here has an ambitious strategy, and part of that is around improving girls' enrollment in technical and vocational training in country, and they're looking at ways that they can make it more inclusive and try to encourage girls to participate. I think we also have some great examples from Stages and other community-based education work that's worked with adolescent children, who have maybe missed out on their education, and they've provided them with skills training and other opportunities. And I think that really foundational to that has been really close work with the girls involved to ask them what type of vocational and skills training they want and what they need, and making sure that it's really designed to be appropriate to their communities and to kind of the economic and livelihood opportunities that we work here. I do think as well we kind of have a responsibility to be linking up with what else we are funding as donors on private sector development and skills training and others, and working with some of the national priority programs here in Afghanistan about how we can strengthen some of those links and not just think within our education projects and within our strategy. Back over to you, Aurora, in case we have another time for a question or to wrap up.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting my mic. I think that was that we're slightly over time or exactly on time, but I do want to extend a thank you to Your Excellency and then also to FCDO for really taking the time to have this conversation with us. I think your feedback, understanding the Ministry of Education's vision for the coming years has been very helpful to everyone on this call, and also for donors to see how we can support the Ministry of Education to really not only increase access for education for girls, but really improve the quality of education. And thank you so much to Laura for providing your insight on how you see that donors can also support that vision. And then before handing it back, I do want to give both of you the opportunity to provide last remarks.
Laura, I think you don't want to go first ever. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you, Aurora, and your entire team for facilitating this, and thank you for the platform to voice my vision and my team's vision. And I like Laura's point earlier about TVET's ambition, high ambitions. And I think I've grown up with always having high ambitions and dreams, because when you dream big, then even if you reach 50–70%, you at least put the mark high up there. And so if we sound like we might be too ambitious, I see it as a positive thing. So thank you for giving our ambition and our vision an opportunity. And I'm hopeful that with your continued support and work, we can change things for the positive for Afghanistan and particularly for girls. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's really great to hear the Ministry of Education, because we definitely want to support and work with you. So understanding what your priorities are very critical. Laura?
Thank you very much. And I should have unmuted first to give the Minister the final say and the final words. But thank you for the opportunity to speak on this panel, and particularly, I think, to address the questions we've had from girls. I think it's been really grounding in terms of hearing from what they want from us. I think we have definite challenges ahead, not least with COVID and making up lost time. I think from last year, I've been looking at some of the questions that we've had in the Q&A and not had a chance to respond. And I think that this is going to be our challenge for the coming years in terms of how we kind of support girls to get back on track and to make sure that we're really focusing on how we can be transformative in terms of the opportunities that we have for girls here. And I've really liked the sense of conversation that we've had today about, you know, a level of ambition and also about seeking creative ways to do this. And I look forward to continuing those discussions as a sector as we continue to plan for the coming years. Back over to you, Aurora.
Thank you so much. And with that said, I'll turn it back to the host to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Her Excellency, Laura and Aurora, for such a fantastic session. We certainly appreciate your candor and vision for girls' education in Afghanistan. The stage's partners will collate your responses, translate them, and share them back with our stakeholders as well. Thank you once again for your time. I now invite Mariela Ruiz Rodriguez to offer some final reflections on girls' education in Afghanistan. Mariela is currently serving in USAID Afghanistan as the Education Office Director. She has been with USAID for 13 years, supervising teams and managing integrated portfolios, inclusive of basic and higher education, technical and vocational education, and workforce development, just to name a few. Mariela has over 28 years of professional experience, including teaching at primary, secondary, and university levels, and development work across a variety of fragile contexts. Mariela, over to you for some final reflections.
Hello and good afternoon. I am not Mariela. My name is Tim Curtin, and I work with USAID's Office of Education. And I work with Aurora, who just spoke. And I also work with Mariela. Unfortunately, she is having a technology issue right now. Okay. And I was asked to step in and deliver her remarks.
Hey, Tim, can you hear me?
Yes. Mariela,
so
you're
my
here.
issue,
You made it.
Hi there.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Happy
so
to turn it back over to you.
With the video.
Happy to turn it over to you. Okay. So that concludes my remarks. Mariela will take it over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Sorry about that, folks. I am having trouble turning on my videos, so I do apologize for that.
No worries. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. It is a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon. As it was mentioned, my name is Mariela Ruiz Rodriguez, and I am the newly arrived Office Director at USAID Afghanistan. Very honored to have been invited to give remarks at this exceptional forum. I am very excited because today, of all days, USAID is celebrating 8 years of partnership with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office to remove barriers to education for young women and girls in Afghanistan. Today also marks 8 years of the FCDO-funded Steps Toward Afghan Girls Education Success Program. You all know it as STAGES. And today we have come to the end of a 2-day journey to review the achievements attained and to better understand the challenges still ahead in support of girls' education. It is a day for celebrations. So I want to thank FCDO and the Aga Khan Foundation for hosting an exceptional event. I acknowledge and thank the Acting Minister of Education, Ms. Rangina Hamidi, for her thoughtful message and for her personal commitment to girls' education and women's empowerment. Thank you to Save the Children, to Care International, and Catholic Relief Services for sharing their invaluable insights on girls' education in Afghanistan and the current context. Together, we're working to improve access to quality education for all students, but especially girls. USAID recognizes the importance of investing in education. Since 2002, we have been a key partner with the Ministry of Education here in Afghanistan to help improve equitable access to quality education for marginalized children, with an emphasis on girls. We have done this through off-budget holistic basic ed and higher ed programs, and also through partnered efforts, such as community-based education, the Girls' Education Challenge, and the Education Quality Reform in Afghanistan. Over the past decade, our efforts ensured that over 3 million Afghan girls gained access to education, that over 182 million textbooks were printed and distributed to schools in all 34 provinces, and that over 580 schools across the country were refurbished and built. Access to quality education is an important path to break the cycle of poverty, and it is a critical necessity for the future of a self-reliant Afghanistan. Improving girls' access to quality education is a shared goal between the government of Afghanistan and all its development partners. The STAGES program is a very good example of how to implement a shared vision. FCDO and USAID are committed to maintaining and nurturing the hard-won gains over the last decade in education. As many of you reflected over the past 2 days and in the various sessions, we must implement services in a holistic manner that is inclusive of the community. We need to engage all actors, especially the government, who has the mandate to provide quality services. Decision-making should be based on robust data and in-depth analysis. We all want to see increased retention rates, decreased dropout rates, as well as a more resilient, better financed, and accountable and sustainable quality education system. To build on the gains, to face the challenges, we must continue to foster partnerships and ensure that everyone, and I highlight everyone, the government of Afghanistan, development partners, community and religious leaders, and Afghan citizens, both men and women, have a role to play in advancing education. Poverty, cultural expectations, and geographic isolation threaten girls' access to a quality education. Girls are less likely than boys to enter primary school, and those who do enter school have a higher dropout rate. Programs like Stages support the education sector to close the gap in girls' access to schools and to create a bridge for them to transition from primary to secondary. Programs like Stages have also made significant contributions this past year to continue education during the COVID-19 pandemic, helping us think about how to promote a more resilient education system. Through the FCDO and USAID support of the Girls Education Challenge, we reaffirmed our commitment to adolescent girls across Afghanistan. USAID's funding of GEC enabled the Stages Consortium to support quality community-based education delivery to over 30,000 students aged 6 to 19. While the official agreement will end soon, we look forward to strong Ministry of Education leadership in order to maintain the momentum that has been created. As a development practitioner, I find it heartening to hear the ministry reiterate its commitment to increase access to education to all girls and boys. To hear the acting minister state her personal commitment to empower girls through education, and to see that over the past 2 days, more than 100 participants have given their time to engage on this very topic, to share lessons learned, identify challenges still pending, to address solutions. Access to quality education for all children, especially girls, is everyone's responsibility. The Prime Minister of Norway, Erna Solberg, often reminds us that when you invest in a girl's education, she feeds herself, her children, her community, and her nation. Educating women is just smart, said the American historian Catherine Drew Faust, the 28th president of Harvard University, and the first woman to serve in that role. These are not isolated thoughts. We all want to educate women because we understand that educating women changes the world. Investing in girls and women's education supports Afghanistan's journey to economic prosperity, to social equality. It supports the future of all its citizens, and it is just smart. I commend all of you here, all of you who have given your time over the past 2 days, for your partnership, for your commitment, for your efforts to making quality education a reality for Afghanistan's children and youth, and for all the future generations. As we continue to prepare and educate all children, especially girls, I am encouraged by the role that Afghan women and men are playing in Afghanistan's journey to being a more inclusive, better educated nation. I thank all of you for your contributions and your participation. It really is an honor to be a member of this community and to share in the journey to educating boys and girls, but especially girls. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariella, for those reflections. We could not agree more. Girls' education does indeed require a holistic approach that is driven by data and evidence. I will now hand over to Ambassador Sherazad Hirji, the diplomatic representative for the Aga Khan Development Network in Afghanistan, for final concluding remarks, post which we have another short video for all of you from Leila again. Ambassador Hirji was appointed by His Highness the Aga Khan as diplomatic representative of the AKDN for Afghanistan in 2019. A qualified lawyer, she has worked in the philanthropic sector for over 30 years, most recently as president and CEO of Canadian Women's Foundation. Ambassador Hirji is a recipient of the North York Women's Shelter's Hope Award, the CPBC Humanitarian of the Year Award, and the Canadian Council of Muslim Women's Women Who Inspire Award. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Ambassador Hirji.
Thank you so very much, Eliza. Just checking, you can hear my voice okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you so much. Excellency Rangina, distinguished panelists, colleagues, friends, guests, and many of my colleagues at the AKDN who I see here in Afghanistan are participating. It's truly a pleasure, but a challenge to just have final concluding remarks after such an incredibly rich 2 days of conversations. I was not here yesterday, but I have been online all afternoon. And so it is quite a daunting task to kind of have the final words. But I would like to do maybe 4 things. One is I do want to acknowledge, and I do want to acknowledge particularly Acting Minister Rangina, because she really is an example of what started in Afghanistan even before we as the international community got here. Girls had education here in this country in the 1960s. They had full access to education. I think the last 40 years have been very difficult for Afghanistan, but before that, there were many women role models. Women participated in almost every part of society. And so there was an inherent culture here where women were valued. And in the 60s, girls also became part of that value system when education opened up. And so I do want to acknowledge the minister because I have met with her and we have spoken about the challenges that she and others work in an environment, as she mentioned, which is challenging, it's difficult, it's evolving, it's complex. And so I think really the credit of much of what we are seeing in Afghanistan goes to women like Minister Rangina, who is really a leading edge role model here for many in Afghanistan. I was going to reflect on some of the shared values that I think for me have been the guideposts for why Stages and this partnership has gone so well. And I was curious because as I was looking through my notes, Mariella actually talked about almost the same things. She called it, I think, a vision. I call it the underlying values. And those values are about partnerships, with government, with the international community, particularly with the communities where we operate. The buy-in from communities is what makes all of our work as AKDN successful, and of all of the partners, I'm sure, where we work in different parts of Afghanistan. And so I think that sense of shared values, of ownership, really of the community buy-in, the community driving their programming, and being in this for the long term. I mean, Stages has been at it for 8 years. I'm actually a product of the thinking that Matt started us with at the beginning of this afternoon, which is 100 years ago when initial schools were going up in this region, in India, in Pakistan. I was born in East Africa, and my family came with this set of values around the importance of educating girls. And I was very much a product of the thinking that started to make sure that girls had an an equal role in education participation is mended. And so I sense that in Afghanistan, we are a little bit behind, but we are going to catch up, I think, very quickly. But that sense of long-term investment, because that really is what builds out much beyond our programmatic cycles. I think that's an important piece. And then for us as the AKDN, and the Minister and I have talked about this also, is that we look at the whole system of education. And again, I think Mariella talked about it, many others have talked about everything from early childhood development, which is, I would say, at the pre-embryonic stage here in Afghanistan. We're doing some work with it. We're looking at how do we make sure that the whole value chain of education, from early childhood education into school improvement programming, into teacher training, all of that kind of package that makes education a more holistic, a more sustainable, and a more enduring investment. And so very much from an AKDN perspective, I think those are critical areas for us. And then I was going to reflect a little bit on my experience over the last 17 months that I have been in Afghanistan. I have to say, I have been so inspired by the women in this country and the girls in this country who have, as we saw with Excellency Minister, the ambition to not hold themselves or other girls and women back. There is a level of resiliency because the conditions under which women work in this country are very, very difficult. And of course, they vary from the urban centers to the remotest districts and villages where we work as AKDN, where many of our partners work. But the level of resiliency, the level of ambition, the level of creativity isn't any less in any part of Afghanistan than it is anywhere else in the world. And I wanted to just reflect to one of the questions that came up earlier about COVID and the impact of COVID. At the beginning of COVID, as the rest of the world was going to online and adapting and pivoting education systems, we did exactly the same in Afghanistan, but of course with the limits that Excellency Acting Minister talked about, which is a lack of access to electricity, lack of access to internet. And so we also worked with the ministry then to put the programming on TV, because more people can access TV than can necessarily access online learning through technology. So we've been part of some creative solutions, and I have to say this creativity is very much part of Afghanistan. And then I'll wrap up, if I can, with a couple of stories, because I think stories really are part of the culture here, and I think they really paint a picture very differently. Going back to COVID, there is the CANCOR here, that is the university preparation, exam preparation, entrance exam preparation, was of course disrupted by COVID because we could not do the same things. And pictures started to emerge in the media about girls, particularly girls, sitting out in open air classrooms, no trees, no shade, under the sun, preparing their entrance examination. I mean, it was unbelievable to watch the volume of the media capture of girls across the country in different parts, wanting to make sure that they did not miss out on the opportunity to go to university because of COVID. And so I think that we saw many, many of those kinds of stories. We saw the story of a young woman last year who was the top, got the top marks in the university entrance exams, a young woman from one of the provinces. And what was so interesting about her is that she was taking her preparation courses for this exam at a center that was attacked the previous year, or just over a year before she took her exam. A number of her classmates were killed in that attack. And that was probably one of the most painful things she went through, and one of the most painful things we have seen in Afghanistan. But it did not stop her and her passion for education. And so she went on to continue her learning and her preparation. And she was the top student in Afghanistan for the CANCOR last year. And so again, these stories resonate. They remind us of stories of women and girls around the world who are ready to take on whatever opportunities are coming their way. And I think the last story is, because it was in the media, just went viral on all the social media here a couple of days ago. And there have been a few stories like this. They're not even stories, they're just photographs And they're photographs of a father on a bicycle with, the vegetable basket at the back, with two little girls in it and their backpacks. And so it's a picture from the back of a father taking two little girls to school. You see that, you see fathers taking girls to school on their motorbikes. You see fathers investing tremendously in their daughters' education and their daughters' opportunity. And I think what it tells me, and I'll wrap up with this thought, is that there is no shortage of talent in this country. There's no shortage of ambition. There's only shortage of enough opportunity for everyone. And I think really for us as the international community, working with the government, working with each other, looking at programs that work and investing even further in the programs that we know are working, I think that really is what we do and what we do better. I think the only other thing I will talk about is the fact that I'm struck. Again, I used to work in a foundation. I used to run a foundation. I've done a lot of work in the area of evaluation and learning. And I'm struck that we are, of course, and we should be, looking at the numbers of girls who have been supported to get to school, the numbers who have yet to go to school. But if I go back to Mariella's point that she made just a few minutes ago, it's about the investment, not just in the girl or the young woman, but it's that investment in her family that ultimately has an impact in her extended family and then the neighbor community and then the neighborhood. And I think the kind of stories Acting Minister Rangina talked about, fathers and elders from villages coming to us for and demanding more education. We see that all the time in the regions we work with. They are demanding education for their daughters because they are seeing what happens when their daughters were not educated. And they are seeing what happens when their daughters are being educated. And so I think what the work we have done in an intensive way through stages, but through much of the other work that we've done, really has unleashed what I think is this tremendous potential. So that I met a young woman who's going on a scholarship to Germany to study black holes. She loves space. She wants to study black holes. So she's going to do that. I've met lots of young women who are in the robotics teams here, who are in skating teams, who are skiers, skateboarders. I mean, you name any endeavor of life anywhere in the world, and you will find young Afghan women rising to the challenge here in Afghanistan, also not being held back by whatever other constraints they have. So to me, this has really been the power of the work of stages. Yes, it's an investment in education, but yes, it's also a change in attitudes in the communities more broadly. And that, I think, is what's going to really, I think, help Afghanistan now going forward, really be able to kind of be resilient even more to what changes may or may not come in the future. And so for me, that has been the inspiration. And of course, the colleagues that I work with here in Afghanistan at all of our agencies, we have 11 agencies here, tremendous colleagues, very passionate, and just a true delight to work here. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of today, and great work to everybody, and congratulations for a fantastic, fantastic program.
Thank you, Ambassador Hirji, for those incredibly powerful closing remarks, and particularly the stories. I think those were incredibly moving. Not sure about everyone else here, but I'm definitely feeling very inspired and have a renewed energy for a global commitment to girls' education. So here's where we conclude our conference. I'm incredibly grateful to our speakers for their honest reflections on girls' education, for your time and commitment, but mostly for your passion. As a global community, we all know the benefits of educating our girls, the difference this can make to our global health indicators and the economy. We have heard this from our speakers today. So we all know what is at stake if we fail our girls, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I leave you all with one thought. And for those of you who work in contexts that are fragile and marginalized, you will understand what I mean. All girls the world over have dreams and aspirations of what they want to achieve and become in their life. Let us work together with our local communities, with the boys and men, with our girls, to strive to do better, go further, and to never give up. Every girl deserves the right to dream. For those of you who would like to see how Leila continued to learn during the COVID-19 pandemic, please stay on for a short video. To the rest of you, please do complete our survey that comes up at the end of this meeting. And thank you immensely for joining us. Good afternoon and good evening.
you.